Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Reread channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about Theon 5, A Clash of Kings. And Theon 5 is a really nice, I wouldn't say like necessarily payoff chapter, but Theon 4 kind of leaves the ending very much in question. Like what actually happened at the end of Theon 4 in the hunt for Bran and Rickon, what really happened there? Because then we jump to other POVs, and through like Catelyn and Tyrion, we find out that apparently Bran and Rickon are dead. Theon has killed them. So this chapter has a lot to explore into what actually happened. And we're not even really going to truly find out what happened with Bran and Rickon until the very end of the book. And so I think it's really interesting the way that the Winterfell plot specifically goes from being a plot line that is not one of the most interesting ones. It's more of the like wartime, politics going on in the north. And then it kind of devolves into like a magic, but then also mystery as to Bran Rickon's whereabouts. So this chapter has a lot of, I think, magical undertones to them, especially with Winterfell as a castle and a setting, because we've always seen Winterfell through the Stark perspective, of course. We've specifically seen it through Bran, Catelyn, Jon, Ned, for instance, a lot of different perspectives into it, but we've never really had someone like Theon, for instance, having a perspective, being there, and also being like an invading antagonistic type of force to Winterfell. Because one thing that I really want to talk about in this chapter is how Winterfell is, I think, developed as a setting. Whereas like Harrenhal feels like its own character and the way it's has its own personality, Winterfell is going to feel very similar to that in this chapter. So that's a really important part of this chapter, but the real main part of it is Theon's turn as a character. He's gone from being like maybe a anti-hero that we don't really, like, especially when he takes Winterfell, to at this point straight up being a villain. He's somebody that he's killed two innocent children that we're going to find out. So I think this is a really good chapter for Theon, especially given it his second to last one. As we get into page 602. Theon dreams of being hunted through a frozen dead forest. Roots trip him, branches whip his face, and blood streaks his cheeks as he runs in terror. And the way it's described in the open to this chapter, it kind of makes it almost foreshadow Theon with being with Reek and being flayed, because he specifically notes in the dream that it feels like strips of his cheek are being taken off because of the branches and stuff. So I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of foreshadowing to Theon's downfall in this chapter specifically, and this is also really to show how the North is turning against Theon, or has already turned against Theon, because well, he's allegedly killed Bran and Rickon, but also that he's killed innocents, and he's doing all of this stuff that, well, if you're a North person, you would hate. And it's a lot about that. It's about establishing Theon's own paranoia, maybe his own guilt, and all of that is coming to bite him in this chapter. Behind him, he hears monstrous wolves, horse-sized, with the heads of children, that as the wolves chase him, he hears their burning drool hissing into the snow. And a lot of this is, Theon is worried about being killed by the direwolves. He knows they're still out there somewhere. He knows Bran and Rickon have survived, and because of that, they can rally the North even further against Theon. And so in a lot of ways, it's less to do with exactly Bran and Rickon killing him, but is them being alive in their symbol that is going to bring Theon down. Theon cries out for mercy, but cannot run faster. The trees seem to have faces and even seem to be laughing at him. It seems a lot of ways that the old gods are turning against Theon. The old gods have a very direct correlation with Theon's story. When we get into A Dance with Dragons, it's going to be a different way that the old gods kind of communicate with him, or even say Bran communicates with Theon, because then it's going to be about trying to get Theon to become, a better man, to get out of this Reek persona. Here, the old gods are just quite literally trying to, it seems like, get Theon killed, are condemning him for the actions that he's done. He tries to scream that he saw the wolves dead, their heads dipped in tar, but no words came, only a moan, as he feels their hot, foul breath on him. It also maybe goes to the fact that if we do see Theon survive Stannis, and we have the idea right now that Stannis might use Theon as a sacrifice, that he might have judgment in front of the old gods, this could be one of those things where the old gods could more or less prove Theon's innocence of killing Bran and Rickon, even though he still has committed terrible acts to innocent children. And at this, something touches him as he jolts awake, shouting and fumbling for his dagger, which clatters to the floor. And I could totally understand this from Theon, especially when you have a nightmare. If somebody was to like just jolt you awake, it would really set you off. And as somebody who's had a lot of like, especially when I was younger, I had a lot of dark dreams, like in terms of dying at the end. Like I'll tell you one of the worst dreams I've ever had. When I was staying the night at my grandparents', because I think it was my mom and dad's anniversary or something, I had this dream where I was in a swimming pool and there was a shark in it. And the shark, I guess, grabbed me and started like pulling me under the water, like if it was the ocean. And then my whole vision like slowly faded into black and I woke up. That was pretty traumatic as a child. Very off topic, but just I can understand Theon's feeling here. But it is to make him look like a fool. That's kind of what this whole chapter is about, is like showing Theon as he thinks he's this, great prince and he's so much better than everybody else. But in reality, he's kind of a fool at this point of the story. Wex, his mute squire, jumps back as Reek enters holding a candle, his face ghostly in the light. Again, a lot of times Reek is shown to be this villainous character that Theon shouldn't trust. But at this point, Theon doesn't necessarily trust Reek, at least especially leading up to the last chapter in Theon 4. But now Theon has become a lot more reliant upon Reek, as we'll see. Disoriented, Theon demands to know why they're in his chamber. And Reek calmly replies that Theon's sister has arrived at Winterfell, as Theon had ordered to be told immediately if she came. Also, you can totally understand why Theon feels quite on edge, given he's a bit paranoid that somebody might try to kill him. And when you have somebody randomly coming into your bedchamber, going to throw you off a little bit. But at this, you can kind of get the sense that Theon has been awaiting a backup, right? He only has a limited amount of men to try and defend Winterfell. He needs support, and that's what Theon is looking for from Asha. And Theon believes that's his right. As he is, in his own mind, Balon's true heir. He should be the next king of the Iron Islands. He believes that he has, power over Asha, that he should be in charge of her. And the problem is that just isn't the case. One, Asha is a very unique character in terms of her being a woman, and she's this, fighter and commander, and she doesn't really view Theon as being the heir. And even Balon himself doesn't view him as being the heir. And that's really shown by the idea that Theon got so little men to actually back him. And so when you have the idea that like Asha has all the power, why should Asha come bending her knee and all this stuff to Theon and all of that? It just doesn't make a lot of sense. And so Theon is very arrogant in this chapter, and he really is arrogant throughout the entire book, especially. I do want to say, I don't know if you guys can hear my cat in the background. She's kind of going crazy playing with a toy, like kind of relatively near me. So I hope that's not distracting if you can hear her. I will try to put a noise gate filter on after this gets recorded, so maybe you guys won't hear her, but yeah. As we get into page 603, Theon mutters that it's past time for Asha to have come, thinking she might have abandoned him, and Theon kind of goes instantly to the negative light. He thinks that maybe Asha abandoned him because, well, if Theon was to die, Asha becomes Balon's last surviving child, and that way that Asha should get the throne upon his death. That is not what Asha was doing whatsoever. Asha is just at this point, like, she sees Theon take Winterfell. Like, think about this from her perspective. So she has a lot more men than Theon does. She has around 1,000, whatever. And so Asha takes Deepwood Motte, and she hears Theon takes Winterfell, which at first is really good news because you've taken the ancestral home of the Starks. You could destroy the castle. You could take prisoners, hostages, and you could retreat, maybe even going to Deepwood Motte itself to get, Asha's aid and all that kind of stuff. But the fact that Theon is not willing to do that, Theon is demanding Asha sends help, all of that kind of stuff, it tells you the disconnect between Theon and Asha, where Theon views, holding Winterfell as imperative to their cause, and also he is arrogant because in a lot of ways he grew up in Winterfell, and so him holding the castle for him feels almost like symbolic in a lot of ways. And he doesn't understand the Ironborn culture. It's everything that really Theon 1 and 2 were about, is that Theon doesn't realize, the Ironborn are a naval power. But I'll also argue from Theon's perspective, if you're going to defeat the Starks, you have to take Winterfell at some point. And so now that Theon has done that for you, you would think if you are genuine about trying to hold domain over the Stark lands, like you did maybe say before the conquest with the Riverlands, you're going to have to hold this land. And so how do you plan on doing that if you're only planning to hold the western coast of the north? It just doesn't really make a lot of sense, really, from either perspective. As dawn light touches Winterfell's towers, as he asks where she is, Reek explains she's eating in the Great Hall. And that's the other part of it, is like Theon, who is supposed to be in charge, he's the quote-unquote Prince of Winterfell, he is the person that's not even like directing where Asha goes or her men. Asha is just kind of strolled in and seems like just taken over. And so Theon in a lot of ways is going to feel disrespected by that he's not being treated with the respect he deserves. And that's going to also play a factor into this chapter, especially as to why Theon doesn't see reason. Theon orders hot water and shutters closed, shivering from the cold that still clings to him after his nightmare. It also just kind of goes to show that Theon is not built to be the ruler of the North or any of that kind of stuff. He is not meant for this castle. Everything in this chapter is to show that. The castle is trying to force Theon out, if anything. He reflects on how all his dreams lately have been cold and full of horror. Last night's dream of dressing the dead boys, forcing stiff bodies into their clothes while insisting he had no choice. Now we know why George tells us this dream, because it's a natural way of Theon telling us, the audience, what he actually did. But I will say this, think about the way that's described. All of his dreams have been cold and full of horror. Does that not sound like Harrenhal? Think about the way House of the Dragon depicted Daemon at Harrenhal, where every night he's having these visions and dreams. The same thing here with Theon at Winterfell. And so I really want to point that out to you guys. George does a really good job of painting Winterfell in a different light and getting us to question it. Winterfell seems like an unnatural castle that's almost watched over by the old gods. The previous night's dreams had been of the miller's wife, who he once slept with, now turned monstrous, biting off his throat and manhood as revenge for her death. In a lot of ways, I also think that this is kind of to represent what's going to happen with Theon, especially in being tortured by Ramsay. He's going to lose that side of himself and become Reek, who's no longer really even a man. That's kind of the way Ramsay describes Reek to others and things like that. But it also gives us a little bit of insight to possibly Theon killing his own sons with saying that he's been with the miller's wife. Now, I will say this. He does describe the miller's wife as having stretch marks, so possibly they weren't actually his children, but who knows? He might have slept with her after she'd already had those children, had been prolonged sleeping with her, more or less. So we don't know. I think it's always a nice note. I really like the idea that Theon is actually a kinslayer and he slays his own sons in the miller's wife's sons, more or less. I think it's a cool idea, but we really don't have much to suggest it. Theon reminds himself that Gelmar had killed her, not him, and that at least Gelmar doesn't haunt his sleep. And that's another thing. So we're going to get into the idea that everyone that knows of what really happened with the quote-unquote fake Bran and Rickon are dead. So the miller, his wife, the children are all dead. Eventually all the guards that were with Theon are going to end up dead. The only people that really know Theon's secret are Theon and then Ramsay. And then also Wex will as well. Wex returns with the water as Theon washes away the sweat, then dresses slowly, deciding Asha can wait after making him do the same. Again, just perpetuating that, Theon has an ego and he feels kind of constantly disrespected by his family. At first, he picks very fine clothing, but then he changes to black wool and ringmail, realizing she respects strength over finery, and that's the issue. Theon is so much about, kind of like how Renly is, about his clothing and the richness, whereas that's not really the thing of the Ironborn. The Ironborn are more about, respect by strength and fear and power. As he straps on sword and dagger, he remembers her mocking him before their father, vowing not to be shamed again. And this is some of the other issues, is Theon has this resentment towards Asha. So even when Asha is telling Theon, good counsel and suggesting what Theon really should do, Theon is much more dumb than someone like Asha. It's because of this personal hatred and resentment that he has for her. Finally, he sets his crude iron crown on his head, ugly and misshapen, adorned with gold and black diamonds, reminding himself that the skilled smith Mycon, who might have crafted a better one, is dead. And this is the interesting part of this, is that George really does bring attention to the crowns of the different kings, because in a lot of ways, it represents something about that character. So for instance, Renly has a really fashionable crown. It's kind of to reflect how he really enjoys the finery and he doesn't really take being a king seriously. For instance, Robb's crown is meant to represent like the hard north and the strength of the north. It's not to be fashionable, for instance. Same here with Theon. Theon's crown is to show that he's no real king. The ugly things he's had to do to get that crown, betraying, Robb and the alleged killing of Bran Rickon, killing innocent kids, it reflects that. George is very subtle in the way he does certain things like that. As we get into page 604, Theon reminds himself his crown is only a prince's crown and that he'll have a finer one when he's king. Unfortunately for Theon, he will never get that crown. But yeah, outside his door, Reek, Erzin, and Crom wait as Theon now takes guards everywhere, even to the privy, fearing assassination. And for Theon, you can see how he's become kind of like Daemon at Harrenhal, where he's kind of on edge. He feels like somebody's going to kill him in terms of people within Winterfell because of his actions, all that kind of stuff. And so Theon has just become paranoid. He doesn't know what to do, and this is all the things that should realize in Theon's head and register is, you should leave Winterfell. It holds nothing but ghosts for you and will lead to your death. Theon then thinks about how several of his men have died mysteriously. Gelmar fell and broke his back. Agar's throat was slit, and Gyner Rednose drowned despite taking precautions. And all of this seems very interesting because the exact same things are happening, say, for instance, in Harrenhal with Arya, mysterious deaths that seem maybe like accidents. Even think about what we're going to see in Winterfell even later in A Dance with Dragons when Theon is there. There's mysterious killings, whether they're done by the Spearwives, or maybe even one of them's an accident, or whatever you want to say. It's all represented in this book. We're going to see some of this similar stuff here. Now, very interesting. It's all a cover-up, right? Because Theon is having all these men killed because they know of what actually happened with the Miller's boys and that Bran and Rickon aren't actually Bran and Rickon. But you see that. There's a little bit of that reflection into what happens later on in the story. But to then assert control, Theon accuses Farland, the kennel master, of the killings and orders his execution. So he basically needs a fall guy, is what Theon needs. He needs somebody to paint the responsibility for why these people are dying, even though it's really him and Reek. When Farland says, "My lord Eddard always did his own killings," Theon is also then forced to wield the axe himself and kill Farland. And for Farland, it's probably the idea like, Farland knows he's innocent, of course. It's for Theon, I want you to look into my eyes and have the balls to kill me, knowing that I didn't actually do this. That's the whole point of it. And again, it paints Theon as being somebody that is doing these horrible actions, is not worthy of being a king or a prince or whatever, and that's reflected in how he couldn't even kill Farland correctly. It took 4 different attempts to get Farland's head off. It just shows that Theon is inadequate. It's kind of what the show tried to do with Edmure, where like Edmure is shown to be very inadequate in the show. It's kind of what George is doing with Theon here and painting the person that he's become. Theon tries to justify it to himself, thinking the Ironborn had to die to protect his secret, but he wishes he had done it cleanly, like Ned, in terms of the execution of Farland. And that's the big reveal. So the big reveal is that Theon is killing his own men. He's weakening his own men, and he's also making the men even more on edge because people are just mysteriously dying. Theon has completely botched holding Winterfell as of right now. The killings stop after Farland's death, though, as Theon's men remain uneasy and fearful. And of course the killings stop because Theon is the one behind them. Like, yeah, of course. Black Lorne warns him that living among enemies is dangerous and suggests leaving Winterfell. And that is true. That's what he should do. And Lorne doesn't know what Theon has done, getting these men killed, all that. But it's just the idea of, like, you don't want to reign over Harrenhal because of its reputation, all that kind of stuff. The same is true of Winterfell and its reputation towards outsiders. But now, you have the people who hate you. You have Theon, who is ordering people's deaths, but to everybody else, it looks like the people of Winterfell are killing the Ironborn guards. But Theon refuses to do this, shouting that he is the Prince of Winterfell, and he will not be driven out by man or woman. It kind of also goes to the idea of, like, Theon has to say he's the king or the prince, all of that kind of stuff, because nobody respects him. He convinces himself that Asha is behind the unrest, plotting to take his place as heir by letting him die. Theon goes to confront her in the Great Hall, finding Asha sitting in the Stark's high seat, which, in all regards, is actually Theon's seat at the moment. It's just another way of showing Asha disrespecting Theon and not really caring about what Theon has to say or any of that stuff. as she sits there tearing apart a capon as her men drink and laugh loudly with his own. His entrance goes unnoticed amid the noise and revelry. Again, just to go to show that they don't care about Theon. Theon is not respected. Could you have seen this like when Ned Stark entered a hall? No. And so that's just to show you and that difference between how people treat Asha and Theon. Something that Theon still doesn't understand. Even though he's captured Winterfell, Theon's actions make him just look weak and not to be respected. As we get into page 605, Theon enters the Great Hall and is angered to see only about 50 men present, most of them his own, while Asha's group numbers only 20. He demands answers from Reek, irritated that the hall isn't full, as it should be for his sister's arrival. And that's the big part of it, is that Asha didn't bring men to support Theon at all. Asha came to really put Theon in his place and to give him a warning and or to tell him the truth that he needs to leave Winterfell, the same thing that Black Lauren told him. Theon is not going to listen, and Theon feels that he deserves all these men, and he deserves respect, and he deserves Winterfell. Theon then strides up to Asha, who lounges casually in the Stark's high seat, laughing with her men and mocking him as the Prince of Fools. Again, it goes into Theon's insecurity of being viewed as weak and as a fool and being mocked. But Theon then snaps back that envy doesn't suit her, boasting that he took Winterfell with 30 men while she needed 1,000 to capture Deepwood Mott. And I will say this, in Theon's defense, like, he is right to some degree. Like, if Asha truly wanted Theon to live through this whole endeavor, why isn't she nicer to him? Or tries to at least, like, not get him to where he's angry and not, thinking straight. And we know Theon's a moron, but if you're Asha and you're truly trying to save Theon's life, you would have approached this whole situation much differently. But Asha then mocks him coldly, calling him no warrior and asking which of the Stark boys fought hardest, the cripple or the babe. And if you're also Asha, let's be fair to Asha as well. You're also knowing that your brother killed innocent children, and he's acting like a complete idiot. So it's a tough scenario that George paints us with Asha and Theon. Theon flushes with anger. Again, this is his biggest insecurity. He knows that they're not even really Bran and Rickon. He didn't want to have to kill them, but because of the situation, he felt that was best, even though it probably wasn't. Theon flushes with anger, remembering the horror of displaying the children's heads on the walls and the chaos that followed, old Nan's silent grief and Farland's attack before he was beaten unconscious. He recalls Maester Luwin pleading to bury the boys properly in the Stark crypts, but Theon refused, needing the heads for display and burning the bodies instead. Afterward, he had sifted through the ashes and kept a melted fragment of Bran's wolf head brooch and the last remnant of what he destroyed. And another part of this for Theon is Theon, in a lot of ways, I don't think wants to bury them in the crypts because, well, think about it. That's not actually where these kids belong. And you also think about the dreams that Theon is having. Theon feels like the old gods are turning on him and wanting him dead, and the crypts are a place that even scares most people. It's not a place people want to go in. And so Theon, for a lot of reasons, doesn't really want to put them there. In this weird way, I think Theon really does respect the crypts for the Starks and doesn't want to necessarily ruin that by putting people that aren't Starks down there. As we get into page 606, Theon insists he treated Bran and Rickon generously and blames them for their own fate. That's what Theon has to say because he's been backed into a corner. I would say he backed himself into a corner, but it makes him look even more foolish. How did Theon let a cripple and a young boy get out of his possession? It makes Theon look terrible. And that's the whole point. It's why Theon tries to kill the kids and all this kind of stuff to try and get a fear factor. And it's just not really working. Asha replies coolly that everyone brings fate upon themselves. In a lot of ways, Asha is talking about Theon. Theon, because of his actions, have really signed his own death warrant. At this, Theon's patience snaps as he demands to know how he can hold Winterfell with only 20 men. And even in this, as Asha corrects him, as she brought 10, the rest are returning with her for protection through the woods. Mocking his pride, she mentions direwolves still prowling and suggests they talk privately. It's interesting because even Asha, she doesn't know it yet, but Asha is saying, oh, there's still direwolves prowling the woods and all that kind of stuff. It's kind of on the nose given that the direwolves are still alive for Bran and Rickon and that Bran and Rickon are also still alive. Now, she's more talking about, like, there's Stark supporters all over the north. They're going to be extremely pissed off with the Greyjoys even more than they already were. And what's even worse for Theon is Theon realizes he's let Asha completely control the conversation, the power dynamics, like she's sitting in the Stark's, great chair. Here's Theon, like talking to her like a servant, right? That's kind of how it would be. Ned would be in his chair and you're Theon, say you're a bannerman coming up to Ned to ask for something. That's the way it's kind of felt here. It seems like Theon is like this boy asking for, help and all this kind of stuff. It should be the other way around. Theon should be the lord and all this kind of stuff at the castle. And so when Asha's like, yeah, let's go talk about this somewhere privately, she's completely dictating and controlling this entire conversation. Theon then blurts out that Dagmar Cleftjaw lost the fight at Torrhen's Square, but Asha already knows this. Asha is much more informed. She's closer to the sea. And so she's going to get information a lot quicker than Theon, who's completely isolated in really a sea of Stark loyalists. But Asha tells Theon Sir Roderick Cassel outmaneuvered Dagmar with superior discipline and mounted men. She tells Theon to be grateful Dagmar lives, leading survivors back to the stony shore. And obviously Dagmar was never going to win. He had far fewer men, and also the Greyjoys fight better on boats and on the sea. Theon grows angry, realizing Asha knows more than him, and then rants about the Northern Lords uniting, Tallheart, Manderley, and the Umbers all marching towards Winterfell. But that's the thing, it's like, you expected that. When you invade the North, that's what's going to happen. The issue that Theon is coming to is, okay, all these armies are marching on me. How do I hold the castle if you don't bring me any men? That's really the point that he's getting to. And so he continues panicking to Asha that an army will be at his gates within a moon's turn, while Asha has brought him only 10 men. Asha doesn't even seem to care and has complete indifference to this, shrugging it off, saying she didn't need to bring any at all. I'll say this, what was the point of bringing these 10 men for Theon? Like generally, what was the point? 10 extra men is not going to stop Theon from dying. So if anything, I feel really bad for these 10 men that have to stay at Winterfell and know they're going to likely die. Asha just shouldn't have come at all. Asha should have just sent a letter to Theon that he should just leave. That's basically what Asha did. She's showing up to tell Theon, hey, it's time to go home. And maybe even to sightsee, say that she's seen Winterfell now, and then leaves. Theon declares he commanded her, but Asha reminds him that their father's command was for her to take Deepwood not to rescue him. And that's the issue. Theon believes he has superiority above Asha because of his sex, because he's a male, and that he is the rightful heir. He should be the person that they're following behind. Not old Balon on the Iron Islands who doesn't know anything. It should be Theon. But Theon hasn't earned that. He hasn't done anything. Like, yes, he's taken Winterfell. That's great. That's a great feat. But Asha has been amongst the Ironborn for years. She's proved herself. And even then, think about it like this. She still isn't able to win the crown later when we see Balon dies because she's a woman. And she's gained respect and things like that. She still is viewed badly because of her sex. But even she is more well-respected than someone like Theon. Theon dismisses Deepwood as worthless and calls Winterfell the true prize. But Asha just retorts, you took Winterfell. You knew you didn't have enough men. You should have thought about that before you seized it. She then mocks him for not burning the castle and taking the Stark boys hostage, the only move that might have won the war. And in reality, it wouldn't have done anything. If Bran and Rickon had been taken to Pike and to Balon, I think Theon would have been a lot more respected. I think the trust there for Balon and Theon would have gone up a ton. But at the same time, would that have ended the war? No. Like, what would the terms have been? Oh, the Iron Islands now control the North because we have Bran and Rickon. That would have never flown. The war would not have ended. It just would have probably meant that Bran and Rickon actually do die. That's the only difference, and that Theon probably has a better standing with the Ironborn and likely probably would now have been in a better position to become the heir if he continued to earn his father's trust. At this, Theon continues with his pride and his ego as he accuses her of wanting to see his prize in ruins in terms of Winterfell. As we get into page 607, Asha scolds Theon. The Ironborn strength is at sea, not deep inland. Winterfell is poorly suited to hold, and it leaves Theon vulnerable because he can't be restocked, and he doesn't have the men. Asha reminds him that at Deepwood Mott, yes, it might not be the best castle or anything, but it's close to the sea. She can be resupplied at any point. But Winterfell, on the other hand, is surrounded by hostile lands and enemies. And that is true. Asha is correct in terms of if you're trying to take land and all that kind of stuff, taking Deepwood Mott makes sense for the Ironborn because, well, it's next to the sea. You can defend it a lot easier. But the problem is, Balon said his goal was, let's take the north. And so he does that because he takes Moat Cailin. That doesn't allow for Robb to get back up north. But the problem is, how are you going to take the north if you're never going to take any castles inland? All you're doing is you're saying, oh, okay, we're just going to take the coast. Like, okay. Like, you're not even taking the eastern coast of the north either. Like, how do you claim you're the king of the north now? It makes no sense. It all circles back to Balon's an idiot. But, yeah, Theon's also an idiot as well. Asha blames Theon for making everyone his enemy by mounting Bran and Rickon's head on their gate. And I will say this. Everybody already hated Theon. Like, Theon killing Bran and Rickon, it might have taken like, oh, people hate Theon. It's like an 8 out of 10. They hate him because they betrayed the North. He specifically took Winterfell. The Greyjoys overall took multiple parts of the land in the North. So they already hated him. But now it's gone from like an 8 out of 10 to like a 10 out of 10. Like there's never any position where Theon will ever be like, say he was captured, he wouldn't be ransomed. He'd be killed and or tortured and then killed. Theon snarls that the boys defied him and his actions avenged Roderick and Meryn as he claims his father would approve and his brothers during the Greyjoy rebellion. He's trying to equate some rationale as to why killing them makes sense. But even that we know not to be true because he didn't kill Bran and Rickon, so he didn't avenge his brothers. And that gets to the whole point of why this chapter, I think, was placed after Catelyn's chapter. One, it's to show what Theon's actions have caused, the repercussions of it, but also to show this side of it. Whereas Catelyn has been throughout her entire journey, it's not been about revenge or any of that stuff. It's always been about getting Ned back or getting the girls back. And now Catelyn's lost that. It doesn't seem like she's going to be able to get her daughters back. Her sons are killed. Ned is dead. It's a nice way of putting Theon's chapter here, which is kind of motivated by vengeance and all this other stuff. Asha counters coolly, noting that other men will share this same conclusion. Maybe someone like Sir Roderick, who may try to kill Theon, which is exactly what's going to happen. So this is my cat Rhea. She wanted to jump up here during the mid-recording, so I thought I'd leave this in for you guys. Say hi to Rhea in the comments, and yeah. Asha urges Theon to burn Winterfell and fall back to Deepwood Mott while he still can. Theon refuses, insisting he took the castle and will hold it. Theon's pride and ego is getting in the way. He wants to be the Lord of Winterfell or the Prince of Winterfell, but at this point it's too late. No one's coming to back him, and the North has rallied against him. Asha tells him bluntly he will hold it for the rest of his life, mocking his ugly, crude crown, and then leaves. And for Asha, she knows Theon is dead. She knows will be the end of his life. Now, Theon's not actually going to die in this book, of course. He's going to be tortured, and I would say arguably worse than just dying straight out. And Asha, I think Asha, in a way, this is the first time she's shown real, emotion towards Theon in terms of, him as a brother. Because even though, Theon has become this horrible person, Asha recognizes that she still is sad that she's going to lose her brother in terms of, what is her mother going to think about this? And, remembering him as maybe a kid. Same thing that Stannis thinks about with Renly. Remembering the younger version of him. And this is really the last nail in the coffin for Theon. This was his last chance to get out of it, and he chooses not to. And I love that George throws in the note that Asha says it's the ugliest crown that she's ever seen, and it reflects Theon's nature, the actions he's done, and how ugly they've been. At this point, we kind of skip ahead with Theon as half of her small force departs with her through the Hunter's Gate as promised. Alone on the wall, Theon suddenly regrets not going with her. It's kind of sinking in for Theon, and I think everything in Theon and Asha's conversation is Theon was using his emotion, and he wasn't thinking rationally. And when he sees Asha leave, it kind of settles in. There's nobody coming to help him. This is it. His 40-odd men are going to defend this castle against odds that are just not favorable. And so Theon is desperate. And at this, we see Reek appear at his elbow. It almost seems like Reek, or Ramsay, I should say, really, sees that desperation in Theon and seizes his opportunity. Ramsay isn't going to want to stay in Winterfell when all these people die. So Ramsay, in a lot of ways, is that, yes, he's going to be able to rally his forces, and we'll see what he does, by the end of the book, but it also gets him out of harm's way. But at this, Theon feels uneasy and briefly considers that Reek's unexpected skills, reading, writing, cunning, should all be indicators, by the way, that Reek is not who he says he is, that he's someone educated and probably upper class. All of these make him dangerous and that he knows too much, right? Theon has leaned on Reek way too much. The whole Miller's killing of those boys was Reek's idea. So Reek knows everything that Theon has done. But also Reek was involved directly in killing all the rest of these Greyjoy guards. Ramsay has a ton of dirt on Theon right now. A ton. And so Theon even considers, like, should I kill Ramsay? Or Reek? Well, in his mind, Reek. He definitely should be. But as we get into page 608, Reek tells Theon it's wrong for Asha to abandon him and warns 10 more men aren't enough to hold Winterfell. Theon agrees grimly, knowing Asha left him undermanned. Reek offers to help, seizing on Theon's desperation, and he asks if Theon gives him a horse and a bag of coin. He claims he can recruit up to 200 men who, quote-unquote, know Reek. That is suspicious right away, because you have to be thinking for Theon, wait, so Reek was with Ramsay. The men he's going to get are likely going to probably have to be Dreadfort men. But why would those Dreadfort men follow Reek just for money? Why would they follow Reek at all? A lot of things that Theon overlooks, but because Theon is so desperate, he doesn't see them. And Theon's also not that smart. Theon is tempted by this, as 200 men might be enough to hold the castle. He promises Reek any reward he wants if he succeeds. Reek names his price as he wants the woman Palla, and Theon reluctantly agrees that 200 men and she's his. One less, and he can go back to having sex with pigs. So you can sense that Theon feels like this is all too good to be true. Theon kind of thinks that Reek's just going to abandon him like everyone else. He's not actually expecting the Reek to get him some men, but it's kind of like a long shot. It's like, well, it's kind of like, what do I have to lose? I'm going to die if I don't get more men anyway. And so he caves in to Reek. Reek departs before sunset with Stark silver and Theon's last hopes, leaving Theon bitterly convinced he'll never see him again. That's what I would probably be thinking if I was Theon as well, that this guy just kind of scammed me and found a way to get out of this awful situation. But that night, Winterfell and the old gods seem to return to Theon's dreams, as he gets a dream of the feast of Robert and Ned all the way back in A Game of Thrones. And I think this is to remind Theon of what he used to have. You know, he used to have a father figure in Ned. He used to have somewhat of a family with someone like Robb, for instance. He goes back to when, the world was full of music, laughter, and warmth. But soon the dream turns. As it turns dark, the hall fills with the dead, Robert, Ned, and all those slain since, rotting and ruined, toasting him with worms crawling through their eyes. Theon recognizes each corpse: Jory Cassell, Fat Tom, Hullen, Mycon, Farland, the miller's wife, Benfred Tallheart, and even the wildling he once killed, saving Bran. And for Theon, it's a reminder of all the bad deeds he's done. Now, he wasn't responsible for all these people's deaths, but it's a lot of it kind of like Theon, it's a lot of it kind of foreshadowing to Theon's downfall, that he may even die soon. But I think it's also another thing, it's like Winterfell is this kind of haunted castle, and it has that for Theon. It's showing him what his possible future could be, in my opinion. But it also, in my opinion, could be if there is a connection between the Starks and the others. If the Night's King, for instance, was a Stark, there's a lot of references to death and a lot of things that you could maybe connect to the others, especially if you believe that the crypts eventually, the Stark kings and all the people in the crypts are going to rise up at some point. There's a lot of that foreshadowing in this chapter specifically. As we get into page 609, Theon's nightmare continues, but he starts seeing not only those he killed, but long dead Starks carved in stone come to life. So this is a lot of the foreshadowing to the idea that we might see the reincarnations of all of the Starks in the crypts, or if there's some sort of connection to the others with the crypts down there. And we even start to see what Theon believes is Lyanna, as Lyanna appears in a blood-spattered white gown with a crown of blue roses. Once again, the crown of blue roses, what she gets at Harrenhal, and also the idea of the blood-spattered white gown seems to symbolize that she gave birth to someone. Now, this isn't an indicator necessarily that this is Jon, because it's just stating that she might have had a child, but I believe that, R plus L equals J, so I believe this to be kind of another line of foreshadowing to the idea of Jon's parentage. Beside her stood her brother Brandon and Lord Rickard Stark, as ghostly figures with grim faces moved through the shadows, terrifying Theon. It kind of also reminds me of how like the White Walkers are described when we get it in the first chapter anyway. So there's a lot here with possible foreshadowing to the others maybe at Winterfell in the end of the series, or things that could happen there, maybe a Stark connection to the others. And at this, we probably get the biggest foreshadowing, I think, of this whole chapter, or at least this section, for the next book. The hall doors burst open, a freezing wind sweeps in. Again, kind of referencing the others, in my opinion. But then Robb Stark enters, bleeding from countless wounds, with Greywind at his side. And also think about it like this. If you believe that Robb is going to be revived with Greywind's head on his body, and becoming some sort of like Night's King figurehead for the others, there's a little bit of that foreshadowing here. But also on more face value of it, you have foreshadowing to the Red Wedding, and Theon being an active reason that Robb dies. You know, him taking Winterfell, not warning Robb about the invasion, and then also allegedly killing Bran and Rickon, which is what causes Catelyn to release Jaime. All of that is because of Theon. And so Theon is heavily responsible for what happens at the Red Wedding. And that's just a little bit of that here. Theon wakes screaming, startling Wex, who flees as guards rush in. Theon demands Maester Luwin. Theon looks the fool. It looks like he's going insane, similar to Daemon and others that we've seen in Harrenhal. Luwin finds him shaken but calms him, agreeing the dream meant nothing. And it's kind of interesting because we've already seen Luwin talking to Bran and debating Jojen about the idea of dreams and what they mean. Luwin might think it might means more, but it isn't saying so. After, Luwin then leaves him a sleeping draught, but Theon pours it away, convinced the Maester wants him dead. Now, this is some interesting foreshadowing to the possible idea of the Maester conspiracy, that the Maesters, in a lot of times, don't work in the best interest of their lord, and kind of use their own personal motivations and gains and all that kind of stuff. In anger and self-loathing, Theon then summons Kyra, violently has sex with her, leaving her bruised and crying before ordering her out. Now, I want to point to this because one thing I criticize George R. R. Martin for quite a lot is how he writes sex. And this is one of those moments where I think he writes it quite perfectly. Not in terms of like what's happening to Kyra is horrible, but in terms of like the way he does it. It's not something that takes 2 pages of us like reading a sex scene. It's Theon having sex with Kyra because it has an obvious reason to be there, but it's only like described a little bit. It's just like, okay, Theon has sex with Kyra, but he's very violent the way he does it. He leaves her with bruises, all this stuff, because it's to show, one, Theon is trying to find any distraction away from his own problems, similar to Asha. Like Asha in A Dance with Dragons, her sex scene goes on way too long, but we know the point of it is she's trying to escape, even for a few minutes, what's going on around her. The idea that the Northern Lords or Stannis could come and take Deepwood Mount at any point. What should she do? Go to exile? That'll last way too long, but we understand why it's there. Here, it's done much better. It's put here, showing Theon and how, horrible he's become as a man, and especially the way he treats Kyra, and him, trying to find some way out of thinking about everything that's going on, his possible death coming in the future. I just wanted to point that out because George shows he knows how to write sex scenes in a way that is impactful to the character and makes sense for George to include, but not take up like 2 to 3 pages and it be like a sex novel. So I just wanted to point that out. Theon then feels kind of alien in the castle. He feels like the castle is trying to force him out. He thinks about how this is Stark land, Stark gods, Stark walls, and regrets not leaving with Asha for the second time, as Theon is kind of realizing his fate. As the sun rises, he looks to the gatehouse where the mounted heads of Bran and Rickon, or who he claims they are, still rot on their spikes. It's just a sense of showing Theon's guilt and the man that he's had to become, or the man he's chosen to become, not that he had to. As we get into page 610, Theon stands before the gatehouse, staring at the mounted heads as the cold winds tug at his cloak. The heads, those of the miller's sons, are roughly the same size and coloring as Bran and Rickon Stark. But after Reek flayed their faces, another big foreshadowing moment that he is Ramsay, Theon had the heads dipped in tar. It became easy for onlookers to believe they were the Stark boys, but Theon reflects bitterly that people will see whatever they are told to see. If he had called them Ram's head, the fools would have imagined horns. So this is where we have the big reveal that Bran and Rickon obviously are not dead. And I think if you were reading this for the first time, you'd probably realize they weren't dead just because we didn't see it through Bran's point of view. and also was left very ambiguous from Theon's last chapter. But again, I think this is a really good Theon chapter. I would say it's probably up there as his best so far that we've gotten in the book. It is really great because it gives us this magical feeling that the Winterfell plot has been slowly building up to with Bran as well, with his dreams and the way Winterfell, the old gods, seem to be pushing him out. And even Theon as a character, even though he's a horrible person, he's really interesting to read because of the difficult things he's going through, and that's his downfall. It's kind of similar to like Catelyn in a way as well. And so again, great Theon chapter, and that's going to get us into really the Battle of the Blackwater. We're going to have one Sansa like prelude chapter, and then we're right into Davos on the Battle of the Blackwater. So I'm really excited. I've been kind of hinting at it for the last couple of weeks, and I've kind of gone back and forth on how I've wanted to do the Battle of the Blackwater. So if you're at the end of this video, let me know. Would you rather me do, continue every single week doing a chapter by chapter, or would you rather just me do the entire Battle of the Blackwater, so all the POVs from like Sansa all the way to when the battle ends as one video? The problem with that is that would be a lot of recording, it'd be a long video, and I wouldn't really post a reread for probably like a month and then just drop a really long video. So you guys are gonna have to let me know, but I hope you guys all enjoyed. I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye guys.